Welcome to the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast, presented by the Beef Cattle Research Council. The most popular content from beefresearch.ca, available on the go. Before we get into this week's episode, a quick message from the BCRC.
The Beef Cattle Research Council hosts a webinar series each year covering topics of importance to Canadian beef producers. These webinars are available free of charge thanks to guest speakers who volunteer their time and expertise to support advancements in the Canadian beef industry and through the Knowledge Dissemination and Technology Transfer Project, funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and Canada's Beef Science Cluster. You can register for the latest webinar series or watch past webinar recordings by clicking the link in the show notes. This episode features the BCRC's Science Director, Dr. Reynold Bergen.
Hi there, I'm Reynold. This Research on the Record article originally appeared in the March 2026 issue of Canadian Cattleman magazine, and it's been reposted on the beefresearch.ca site with the publisher's permission. Today we're talking about how solving problems starts with asking the right questions. Diseases start when a susceptible calf encounters the wrong combination of germs, weather, and management stresses. With respiratory diseases like pneumonia, viruses infect the upper respiratory tract and the nose, that sort of thing. And that allows bacteria to infect the lungs and the lower respiratory tract. That means that protecting calves against the initial viral infection is really key to reducing the risk of pneumonia. And we use vaccines to do that. That can be tricky with newborn calves because maternal antibodies from the cow's colostrum can interfere with the protection from injectable vaccines. New intranasal and oral vaccines are more effective in newborns because they stimulate a different part of the immune system that doesn't get interfered with by antibodies from the colostrum. Now, pneumonia is usually associated with viruses like BHV1 and BPIV3 and BRSV and BVDV1 and 2. In contrast, bovine coronavirus is usually associated with scours. But some researchers have begun to suspect that bovine coronavirus might also be involved in respiratory disease. Nathan Erickson and some colleagues at the Western College of Veterinary Medicine in Saskatoon worked with a consulting veterinary practice and one of their large commercial clients in north central Alberta to assess whether a coronavirus vaccine might help protect pre-weaned calves against pneumonia. And that research paper is linked in the online version of this article if you want to read the details. So what did they do? Well, this ranch had a long calving season. So they started in mid-February and went all the way through May. And they had a history of pre-weaning pneumonia. So this has been going on for a while. And in earlier years, diagnostic tests that had been done on nasal samples from sick calves detected coronavirus more often than other viruses. And so this team designed a trial to see whether adding a coronavirus vaccine to the calf health program would help deal with the pneumonia problem. So within a day of birth, nearly 900 calves from the same calf crop were given intranasal Inforce 3. So that's a vaccine against BHV1, BRSV, and PI3. Those are some of the viruses I mentioned earlier. And at the same time, half of the calves were also given CalfGuard, which is a vaccine against coronavirus and rotavirus scours. Now, that's an oral vaccine, but they gave it intranasally in this study. So there were about 450 calves there, and the other 450 calves were not given CalfGuard intranasally. They weren't given CalfGuard at all. And then cow-calf pairs that had similar calving dates were penned together until the booster vaccinations were given at roughly 49 days of age. Now, those boosters, all calves were boosted with injectable pyramid FP5 plus pre-response that protects against BHV1, BRSV, PI3, BVD types 1 and 2, and Mannheimia. And they were also given Vision 8 Somnus, which is an 8-way clostridial vaccine that also contains Histophilus. So all the calves got that. And half of them, the same ones that had been given the intranasal CalfGuard, coronavirus vaccine at birth also were boosted with injectable calf guard. So the other 450 calves weren't boosted against coronavirus. So we had half the calves were given the coronavirus intranasal at birth and then boosted at 50 days later, and the other half of the calves didn't get either of them. So then all the cow-calf pairs after the boostering were turned into a large quarter section field where they monitored calf health until the time came to put them out to pasture. And then at the end of the grazing season, they collected weaning weights and they calculated economics comparing between the 450 calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus at birth and at spring processing compared to the 450 that hadn't. And here's what they learned. Well, at first they learned that the calving period has an effect. And this isn't specifically about coronavirus, but it does emphasize the importance of a tight calving season, which is something we talked about in the last couple of columns. So this herd had a pretty drawn-out calving season. I mentioned that earlier. And in that calving season, just over a quarter of the calves were born in the first 3 weeks of the calving season. 42% were born during the second 3 weeks, and then the rest of them, 29%, were born after that. And here's the important bit. Before the calves went to pasture, 16% of the calves born during the first 3 weeks were treated for pneumonia. 25%, a quarter of the calves born during the second 3 weeks were treated. And then it dropped off a bit to about 12% among calves born at the end of the calving season. So regardless of when your calving season is, it's ideal to have most of the cows calve in the first 3 weeks. That's best for calf health, it's best for calf growth, and it's best for generating a uniform calf crop. But in terms of pneumonia in this study before turnout, while the cow-calf pairs were in the group pens, pneumonia treatment rates were significantly lower for calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus. So 16% of those calves were treated compared to 21% of the calves that hadn't been vaccinated against coronavirus. Mortality rates were also lower for calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus, especially among those calves that were born during the second 3 weeks of the calving season when most of the pneumonia was happening. In that second cycle, 0.5%, so 1 out of 200 calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus died, compared to 2.6% or 5 out of 200 for the calves that weren't. So 2.5 times as many unvaccinated calves died compared to vaccinated. And again, a short calving season helps to reduce newborn death loss. In terms of pneumonia after turnout, so to make sure that the pneumonia relapses from calves that have been treated previously, to make sure those results didn't muddy this, they only compared differences in post-turnout pneumonia between calves that had not been previously treated while they were in the group pens, just to keep things fair. Now, after those calves went into the larger field, 4.5% of the calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus were treated for pneumonia, compared to 7.2% of the calves that weren't. So again, vaccinated calves, lower treatment rates than unvaccinated calves. And that difference was just about statistically significant. Now, in terms of economics, the calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus weighed 4.5 pounds more than those that weren't. Per head vaccination costs were $27.60 higher for calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus, partly because of the added vaccine costs, which was about $10.60 for the 2 doses, as well as labor, which they charged at $17 for the 2 doses. Then those are the extra costs associated with 2 doses of the calf guard vaccine. Now, on the other hand, calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus also had lower treatment costs. So, $2.31 per head versus $3.18 per head across all the calves. And they had a higher weaning rate 98.5% versus 97.7% compared to calves that had not been vaccinated against coronavirus, just because more of them survived to weaning. So when they put all that together in combination with the heavier weaning weights, calves that had been vaccinated against coronavirus netted $10.50 per head better than the calves that hadn't been. So what does all this mean to you? Well, even if you don't usually have a problem with scours, vaccinating against bovine coronavirus might complement or go along well with other calf foot vaccines and give an added level of protection against pneumonia in nursing calves. So herds that have coronavirus associated with pneumonia in their nursing calves might benefit from vaccinating against coronavirus, and your vet can help sort out if that's right for you. Now, the bottom line is that an effective vaccination program returns more than it costs. Also, use the experts that you've got. You're the expert on what's going on in your herd, but you can work with your veterinarian's expertise to develop and refine and troubleshoot an overall herd health and vaccination program that fits your herd and your situation. And when your veterinarian is stumped, they probably know a researcher who can help you both sort out the problems. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can find all relevant links and information at beefresearch.ca or in the show notes. The Beef Cattle Research Council is funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and strives for excellence in the production of Canadian beef, cattle, and forage through research, innovation, and extension. Tune in every Tuesday as the Canadian Beef Cattle Podcast delivers straightforward insights, expert information, and a wealth of practical knowledge for Canadian beef producers. Subscribe now.